Peter, coming back to my point though, if the Chinese build a base on Daru, they'll be able to control, as I said, all the maritime traffic through the Torres Strait. Now, we import 80% of our oil. Most of it comes from refineries in Singapore. And the only way that oil could be moved to ports on the east coast of Australia, like Brisbane and Sydney, is through the Torres Strait. So just as the Chinese can threaten the movement of ships from Taiwan and Korea and Japan via their bases in the South China Sea, they would be able to hold a dagger to our throat. This is a major risk to us, surely.
Alan, to be honest, I just don't see it as a realistic prospect. That's my assessment, and that's something that we've looked at very closely in terms of what the intelligence is demonstrating. I know that there's been a lot of speculation around that project for many years, but I don't see it coming to fruition.
Well, Greg Sheridan recently wrote in the Australian newspaper, and I quote, "The Australian Defence Force is almost insanely structured to meet none of our strategic needs. Not one of our services, Navy, Air Force or Army, has any strategic strike power. Every one of our major defence programs," he wrote, "is in disarray with their scheduled to deliver capability so far into the future that it's in the realm of science fiction." What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think Greg Sheridan is one of the most highly respected defence journalists in the country, but he's wrong when he makes a couple of those points. And I think it's very clear that when you look at the direction that the government's provided to defence, when you look at the acquisitions that are taking place, the Guided Weapons Explosive Ordnance enterprise that we've entered into, a multi-billion-dollar program to acquire missiles, but also to domestically establish that industry, so growing that manufacturing base here in Australia, the work that we're doing in space, in hypersonics, in denial of services, the $10 billion that we invested in the budget into Operation Red Spice, which is about protecting the defences of our country. And as we've seen in the Ukraine, that now is a very significant frontier where the attacks are online, which are deniable by countries like China or North Korea or Iran, for example, but can bring down a banking system or an energy grid, for example. They are all significant frontiers for us to defend. And if you look at obviously what we've done already, but what we're in the process of doing under the AUKUS deal, that is an historic deal that will provide the security underpinning of our country, for the next 50 years.
Okay, just before you go, that Solomon Islands deal, China and the Solomon Islands, did the Australian government, you've been on the National Security Committee for a long time, did the Australian government know about this deal last August?
We have spent many hours in the National Security Committee dealing with this issue over a long period of time, Alan. Every move that the government's taken has been based on that considered advice. The Labor Party at the moment criticises Scott Morrison. They have no criticism of Jacinda Ardern, the Labor Prime Minister in New Zealand, who has essentially followed the same playbook as our Prime Minister, and based on, no doubt, the advice that she's receiving from intelligence agencies. Prime Minister Ardern or her Foreign Minister haven't been to the Solomon Islands, and there are good reasons for that, not all of it publicly released. So when you look at the aggression of China, the bullying within the region, their actions in relation to the Solomon Islands, they operate by very different rules than what we do or New Zealand does, or even Japan or other countries within our region. We have to be realistic about that. The problem is not with Japan, it's with China under President Xi. The problem is not with India, where there's acts of aggression and Chinese troops have killed Indian troops just in the last few years on that disputed land border. The problem is not with India. The problem is not with New Zealand. It's not with, as you say, the Philippines or Vietnam or Australia.
Or with the Chinese people. Or with the Chinese people.
or indeed, absolutely. I mean, we have one of the most amazing diaspora communities here in Australia. Well over 1 million people of Chinese heritage. They are law-abiding. They have been, educating their children
and make contributions to the national economy.
Small business owners, enormous contributors, and wonderful Australians. And our gripe is not with them; it's with the Chinese government under President Xi.
Good on you. Good to talk to you. Hope we can talk again. You're doing a wonderful job, and Australians are very grateful. Thank you for your time. There he is, very informed, isn't he, and tough. Peter Dutton, the Defence Minister.